Welcome to Season 2 of Into the Forge, the Lemnos podcast, talking with hardware entrepreneurs about the journey, tools, and lessons that shape their startup and product. In this episode, I'll be talking with Sébastien and Thomas, the co-founders of Farmwise. They are building robots to help farmers tend their crops, starting with weeding. If you've ever picked weeds in your yard, you know what a tough job that can be. Now imagine doing it for thousands of acres of farmland. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Why don't you start off, give me your names, and tell me what you're working on.
Hey Eric, I'm Sébastien, CEO and co-founder of Farmwise.
Hi, I'm Thomas Palomares, co-founder and CTO of Farmwise.
And what are you guys working on?
So we're working on autonomous robots for agriculture. So robots that can go through the field without supervision and automate farming tasks and improve the yield of farmers.
So are automating farming tasks, is that like watering the plant, or like what are you doing on that farm?
So the long-term vision of our project is to automate pretty much everything from seeding to harvesting. Obviously, as a startup, we want to start very focused. So we're starting with the weeding process.
You are weeding fields.
That's correct.
Weeding is hard. I have done a bunch of weeding in my yard. I'm sure everybody tells you that. That's a tough job.
Yeah, so currently the two main ways farmers are dealing with weeds in their field is either by spraying herbicides throughout the field or by hiring people to go out there and use very basic tools to do this process. So we basically providing a third alternative to those processes.
Gotcha. So how did you get here? Why did you start Farmwise? How did you get here?
Yeah, no, very interesting. We're just when we finished our graduate studies, we're really interested in ways computer vision and machine learning could really improve people's lives and could bring a main difference into some people's jobs. And we did into agriculture, mostly for me, my grandparents were farmers, so I've always been a field in which I was really interested in. And so we started to talk a lot of farmers, understand their daily problems, what were their issues that were preventing them from either going fully toward organic farming or to just have a easier day-to-day job. And and we realized, as Sébastien was saying, they have a lot of processes on which they're using a lot of pesticides for them because they didn't have any better solution, or there was very harsh processes to do manually. And we thought we can come up with a way of make their job easier and moving them toward a more sustainable way of farming.
So you have built a robot that runs through the field and, as you said, uses computer vision. So it's actually watching the plants and then how does it go through that process of doing its job?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so at its core, what we're doing is looking at each and every plant. So we have a bunch of sensors, visual cameras, and other types of sensors that are capturing data on a plant-by-plant basis. But what's really interesting about what we built is that we're also closing the loop between this plant-level data collection and what we can call plant-level action. So we're leveraging the data that we're gathering on a plant-by-plant basis to actually tailor the action for each plant individually.
So as you're rolling over the field, those cameras see each plant and they look and they go, is this my plant or is this a weed, I guess? And then I guess the action is, if it's a weed, it's got to go.
Yeah, exactly. And we're also collecting a lot of very important data for the farmers, such as what's the health of the plant, does it have any disease or insect on it, what's the height and exact dimension of the plant, is some part of my field growing less than the other part of the field. So all the data that people try to capture currently by just coding through the field, we can really reliably gathering it.
So it sounds like the power of this is by looking at each plant, you can come up with so many different actions to help the farmer out. And it sounds like you started with weeding as just that first action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and really our goal is to basically bring processes that are done at the field level today to the plant level. And so by spending more time on each plant, we can optimize each process plant by plant. And that's really different from what is currently done in most countries.
Now, this question is for both of you. Had you worked on hardware startups before? Is this your first hardware both startup and then before that, were you hardware junkies back when you were kids? Were you disassembling toasters? Did you study it at school? When did the hardware bug get you?
Interestingly, both Thomas and I, we define ourselves as software guys.
Okay.
So we've actually never really worked on hardware before. Obviously.
What? No, just kidding.
We've played with some Legos and we've built like few pieces of furniture in the past, but really this was our first serious hardware project.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, it was also our first startup.
Yeah. Now it changed a lot. It's been a year that we've been playing daily on all of the machines. Now we're really getting into hardware, but at the beginning, yeah, it was an interesting approach.
So going into that, where you guys are really, really smart software guys, how did you think about that going, wow, we have this idea, but it requires us to work on hardware, something we've never worked before. How did you think through that? Did you do any sort of soul searching on it, or was it like, no, this is exactly what we want to do, we're going to jump in?
Yeah. So the way we came to define what we wanted to work on was really to try to understand the real pain points that farmers had. So we really started without, I guess, with very few bias on what should be the ideal solution. And it just came to be that the solution that we had in mind for the problems that we had in front of us was this hardware, included a very important hardware component. So given that, we started to gather resources around us. Joining Lemnos was part of that, and we hired talented engineers who had experience in hardware.
Right.
Yeah. At the very beginning, we just started to mock up a lot of ideas that we had on what the company could be and what our product could be, and we tested a lot of them with farmers all the time. So that was like a year and a half ago, and like the very, very early thing we did was like an app to detect the tomato diseases, because farmers were telling us that like they couldn't know what kind of disease they had on the tomato. So we had like a fake app that could not really say what kind of disease would it be, but show that to farmers. And every purely software ID we're showing to a farmer, we're realizing that all the time the answer was the same, like, oh, it's super interesting, but I'm missing so much labor that I would never have the ability of using the data you're gonna give me or applying it in any way. And realize like, oh, if we're not building anything hardware that's gonna really act on the plant, we're never gonna use it.
So it sounds like a theme that was super important to you was when you decided on your first product, it was really a series of customer interviews.
Yeah.
And just an iterative process on that. You know, your family was in farming or something, but how did you go from being software guys, you're like, okay, I've got to go out and find farmers and I've got to interview them. How do you approach that? Which is, a lot of entrepreneurs have this thing where it's like the thing they want to build is maybe not something they've done before. And so you almost have to have the emotional courage to go just knock on a farmer's door and go, hey, I want to talk to you about this.
Yeah, that was very that at the beginning. So we just had read articles of recent like deep learning and computer vision applications in agriculture, and thought it would be like really interesting to dig deeper into that. And so we contacted a few researchers, had a few ideas of what we could do, but speaking to farmers was really the thing we needed to. And so we started by going to farmers market and just speak with every single farmer that was there about what was their issue or potential ideas of trying to solve them, if we could go and visit to the farm. And then we went there, we volunteered in a bunch of farms when we're going, spending the days there on either like weeding, harvesting, removing like every single bad crops that they didn't want to sell. So we spent a lot of days working in farms, speaking at every time with like other employees of the farm of their work, daily working conditions, and speaking to the manager of the farm at the end of the day. So spent a lot of time doing that.
Yeah, at the very beginning, like being very humble about like understanding that you don't understand anything about like this new industry was, I think, like a very strong point, and one of the reasons why farmers were so inclined to talk to us. And starting very small by visiting small organic farms actually helped us later on to get in touch with larger and larger growers. So today we're working with some of the largest vegetable growers in California, but as Thomas just said, we really started from the bottom, just going to farmers markets and working in very small farms.
Yeah, I've heard a wonderful phrase. It's you have to approach a problem with the beginner's mind. And in this particular case, you said, hey, you've got to learn a lot about the market. And so you just sort of leaned into it and studied and now are pretty darn knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, even though Thomas comes from a farming family, we really took the bias to assume that we knew nothing about this industry and genuinely ask about their problems trying to have a pretty open mind, and that worked out pretty well for us.
Yeah, and spending time working there to really see what they're facing on a daily basis, that helped a lot.
One question entrepreneurs ask us a lot is, as I'm building up my team, I hear that I have to go get advisors and mentors, and I've got to surround myself, but they're like, what kind of advisor am I supposed to get and how many of them? And we just don't know what to do. And so I always ask, entrepreneurs like yourselves, how did you approach that? How did you look at, do we need people around us? What kind of people do we need around us? And how do you select them?
Yeah, so for us, I think this was a very important point. As pretty young entrepreneurs, surrounding yourself with experienced and talented people was very instrumental, I think. So the way we did it was, as soon as we graduated, we joined an accelerator program in the Valley. Which was like a very good program and well connected, and helped us get in touch with a lot of mentors, both technical mentors and business-oriented mentors. There, obviously, not everyone is extremely interesting or excited about what you're doing, but you just need a couple of them to be excited enough to really push you through this first hurdle of starting to build a network. And then building a network kind of happened like incrementally over the first few months. You get introduced to other interesting people in your field. As long as you're very humble and happy to meet new people, this process can actually be very fast. So we're very lucky to be working with 5 official mentors, with people under like very purely technical people with experience building robots, basically. But also people coming from the farming industry and business people with experience in other industries, but who really feel related to what we're doing.
So as you've gone through this development process, what are the most important tools that you have found that have given you a little bit of edge in building your product? Those could be processes, a physical object. What gives you and your team a little bit of a boost in making these really hard products?
Tools. I don't know if that counts as a tool, but we started in a place called Tech Shop in San Francisco.
No, this counts.
Which is a fab lab. Where it's for like a very fairly cheap monthly subscription. You have access to a lot of machines, like every machine a hobbyist can ever dream of. And that has been like very, very, very convenient at the beginning, because we definitely couldn't have afforded to buy all those machines, and we had access to them on a daily basis, and we could prototype very quickly.
I think like your first machine, the only place you couldn't even build it here. You needed the Tech Shop tools to build it.
We needed a lot of Tech Shop tools. I ended up still going there sometimes. We even met our lead hardware engineer and first employee there, who was working there as a consultant. This place ended up being really useful to develop the whole first product.
Yeah, and secondly, I don't know if you can call it a tool, but going back and forth between the lab and an actual place where you can test in real life your product, for us was probably one of the most important things that we've done. So having access to a test field that's pretty close by and convenient to iterate on, I think is one of the most important things when we built our first product. We really started from something that had nothing to do with what we have now. And so being able to iterate not on a monthly basis, but really on a daily or weekly basis was really important for us.
Right. What's been the most surprising thing that's happened to you in the process of getting to where you are, right? Going from an idea to this product that now runs out in farmers' fields all the time. What caught you by surprise?
So So obviously we run into a lot of technical challenges. So I mean, technical challenges are always both surprising and interesting to solve. Like on a more high level note, I'll say that one of the most surprising things when we started the project was to see how many people were actually willing to help us, both from the farming industry, like potential customers who are just like interested in getting a product like that, but also people outside of this field with just an interest for vision. That kind of was really surprising, at least to me, because when you start your first company, like you kind of feel you're jumping alone in a very unknown area. And the first thing you realize quickly is that you're actually not alone. And you have a lot of, if you believe in your vision, I think you can get a lot of people to help you. So that for me was one of the most surprising things.
That's true. On my side, I think one of the most surprising was how naive we were on how easy some of the challenges would be. Like a lot of things we would think we didn't really know how it would work. We would think like, oh, we can manage to get that way or that way. Like one of the big examples for us is we thought at first of starting the machine with batteries, and we spent a lot of time really thinking how we will make the batteries, etc. And after a couple of months, we realized we had like order of magnitudes far from being able to reach that with batteries. And a lot of challenges like that we realized more or less quickly that were like pretty impossible. So a lot of realization, but I'm very happy that we're naive and very optimistic at the beginning, because a lot of stuff we have never dared to try, and finally they just ended up being more difficult than what we thought. But we always ended up managing to make them happen. So
I recently talked with Dave Merrill, another Lemnos CEO, about this, and we talked about that. That's one of the big challenges is no matter what you're doing, you're going to run into more than one thing over the development cycle that you didn't anticipate, and initially you don't know how to solve it. As your team runs into those things, how do you philosophically keep your team motivated and focused, and how do you approach those unknowns? Because they're coming. I mean, they come for every entrepreneur. How do you think about those from a mental or philosophical perspective?
I guess so. We are a purely technical team right now, and I guess one of the things that mostly interests engineers is one of them is purpose and having a vision toward which you're working. But the other thing is also to solve challenging problems. So one of the ways we try to think about unexpected events happening is that they usually are pretty interesting problems to solve. So that's one of the way we keep ourselves motivated toward like the tons of unexpected challenges that we see, is that most of the time we just take them as a very interesting problem.
Yeah. We also try pretty often to have everyone of the team go to a field test when we test or demo the machine to farmers, because it's always very exciting to see how enthusiastic farmers are about the machine and like all the opportunities it can bring. And every time we go to a field, we see the robot in action and we see how excited farmers are about all of this new technology. It really gives like a lot of energy and motivation about coming back and solving all the small technical issues we realized.
I love this next one because it can have so many answers. What's the hardest part of being a hardware startup founder that you found to date?
Yeah. Well, one of the key differences between hardware and software startups is probably time that it takes to grow, like both to scale revenues or number of products out there, and so on. So matching investors' expectations with what you can actually achieve in 6 months is one very challenging thing. It's feasible for a software startup to have a 500% growth month over month. It's quite challenging to have for a hardware startup. So it doesn't mean that this is any close to being impossible, but being very open and direct with investors about what they should expect in terms of growth, I think is very important.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I find also, I would say, hardware or a startup that combines hardware and software, which is pretty much the case of all the companies at Lemnos, for instance. It's always pretty hard to have everyone on the team understand the challenges of the other people of the team, like the software team understanding the hardware understanding the software, because a lot of decisions or actions that one of the team will take will impact the other one. Like every hardware decision we make is going to impact the way we do the software and vice versa. And so it's really important to have everyone be aware of what's happening on all the rest of the product. That was fairly easy when we were 4, when we could have everyone be present at most of the meetings. Starts to get harder when we get bigger at the company. But yeah, that's a very interesting challenges. Very interesting for every employee to discover about like a lot of other fields and part of the product that they don't have a lot of knowledge about, but hard to keep everyone aware of everything that's happening.
What advice would you offer to founders who are about ready to start a hardware company? With everything you've learned so far, what would you tell them?
When it's about to start a hardware company, I would say, I don't know, yeah, it's pretty similar as the software actually, but just go and try to make something. And we realized when we're speaking with farmers, for instance, that are pretty down to earth, it was really hard to explain the idea when they wouldn't see the prototype. And as soon as we had like even a little of something, they were super happy that we're trying to bring something on their farm and really working on it. And yeah, I think people don't attach that much to software. When they see a piece of software, they don't really understand how much time you spend on that. But when they see a piece of hardware, they always value like, it's something and you spend time on that, and they really value it. So it helped a lot with farmers to show any kind of prototype we've been doing. So yeah, just start making it.
Yeah, for me, I guess we come back to one of the earlier points. Trying to have a very frequent iterative process. Mm-hmm. So very short time between hardware experiment in the lab and the actual test in the field. Even very early on, the smaller this period is, the better and the quicker you'll be able to get to a product that actually work. For us, for instance, pretty much none of the components that are actually on our prototype were first decisions.
Okay.
So we basically changed virtually every single component of the machine from the time we started to now. And the only way we were able to achieve that is because we had this weekly field test that allowed us to quickly go from an idea to actually checking for real if this idea works.
Right.
So trying to have a very short iterative process and iterative period is I think very important.
Yeah, just to rebound on that. And amongst all the things that we changed, some of them were for technical reasons because it was obviously not working, but most of them were because when we went on the field, we realized that that was not the right thing to build, and we're pretty happy to not have spent too much time on that. But yeah, also in our mindset, Sébastien was saying, one of the challenging things about having hardware startup is that you need to convince investors that you have hardware timelines. Also on our side, it was to convince ourselves that now we have hardware timelines, while we were used on more software timelines. So we tended to try to do everything in a very short time, and with hardware, everything takes more time. But yeah, that all ended up pretty well because even if it took a bit more time than we expected, we always ended up doing that in a really short amount of time compared to like a much more reasonable timeline we could have set at first.
So you mentioned you had worked at an accelerator before Lemnos, and then so my question is how or why did you pick that particular accelerator first, and then why did you choose to work with Lemnos? So that process of selecting who to work with over your time, how did you go through that? How did you make the selections?
So at the very beginning, first of all, the reason why we choose this accelerator mostly was about network. Again, like we were obviously very honest with ourselves about being young and also being international founders. So obviously our network at the very beginning was close to zero. So choosing an accelerator that's actually in San Francisco and has a reputation of being well connected was instrumental for us. So that's for the accelerator. For Lemnos, first of all, our accelerator was not at all oriented towards hardware companies. So we come from a software background as well. So we wanted to surround ourselves as soon as possible with people experienced building hardware hardware products and hardware companies. So Lemnos was through like the reputation that we heard in the Valley, was one of the most well-known hardware accelerators there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, gotcha. So at the end of the day, it's been 25 hours, and you're coming home. You've been working on your solution all day. What do you guys do to sort of unwind, to get out of the mode of building this amazing agriculture robot? What books are you reading? Is it TV, a favorite band, a gadget? What is it that allows you to sort of get away from everything you're doing at work?
So a couple of things. I've started to learn how to play piano last year. So I'm a very humble beginner, but that takes time. So that's one thing. And otherwise, I read. Yeah.
And what do you read?
So usually books around stories about founders.
Okay.
One of the last books I've read was The Hard Things About the Hard Things, which is one of the
excellent book.
One of the Bible here, and actually I thought it was very interesting book because like always focused on all like what he did when things went very poorly. And I first of all, it's usually pretty funny, and it's most of the time very interesting.
Yeah. I only ask what kind of book because we found that some founders cannot read nonfiction books when they go home because fiction should not be too close to reality. So they need to like read fantasy or something just to get away. And then there's another group that's like, I just read more information when I go home.
Really? Yeah. I'm part of the student bucket. For sure.
Yeah, I think me too. Definitely.
And you?
What do I do when I go home? Most of the time I do some sport where it's hard to think at the same time about work. So I do mostly like climbing and boxing. And in both of the situations, if I'm not fully focused on the exercise, something bad will happen. So that helps just to completely forget about work and just focus on this exact sport. And then when heading back home, usually just watching a series or reading a book.
So didn't your team actually do a Spartan or a Tough Mudder together?
Oh yeah,
we did a Spartan race.
Yeah?
We did a couple of team building events. One of them was a Spartan race.
This one was like 10 miles one.
Yeah.
With 25 obstacles.
You're not doing the Spartan sprint in like a couple of weeks? AT&T
might,
Park.
We might.
We already did this one. Actually.
Oh, we already did this one actually.
Oh, you did it last year?
Together.
The two of us.
Okay.
Like 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah.
Maybe you can give me some tips about it. So.
But there's a lot of stairs. That's just...
Yeah, a lot of stairs is what I hear, and bear crawling up the ramps.
Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one.
Yes. So I'm getting ready. So. Well, thanks for your time, guys. And if folks want to reach out to you, though, all your information will be up on the website.
Absolutely. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Into the Forge. If you have questions or comments, feel free to reach out to me via the email address podcast@lemnos.vc. And for older episodes, please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or listen to episodes on the lemnos.vc website.